On the evening of December 12, 2024, at a busy intersection on the outskirts of Scottsdale, Arizona, the police received a report about a car driving dangerously, swerving between lanes and posing a risk to other vehicles. When the white SUV was ordered to stop, a well-dressed woman stepped out and declared that she was the wife of a police officer and, therefore, exempt from traffic laws. With a strong odor of alcohol and an arrogant attitude, she quickly turned a routine check into a chaotic and almost unbelievable series of events. On a crowded road in the suburbs of Scottsdale, under the sweltering heat of late afternoon, the loud sound of car horns mingled with the busy noise of vehicles moving hurriedly. Each car, with its engine roaring, seemed to be trying to break free from the congestion of the traffic jam. The red lights from the tail lamps created a dazzling spectacle, like flickering lanterns in the dark, intensifying the already tense and suffocating atmosphere. All of this blended together into a chaotic scene, like a long snake trying to slither through the twists and turns of the busy flow of the afternoon. In the midst of this, a white SUV suddenly appeared like an intruder, weaving and swerving between other vehicles, causing confusion and panic among the drivers. The car not only cut through others aggressively but also changed lanes without signaling, creating a mess on the road. Surrounding drivers had to swerve quickly, with some even veering into the opposite lane to avoid a collision with the speeding vehicle, seemingly unaware of the dangers it was causing. The screeching of brakes, the sound of tires scraping the road, and the continuous honking of horns all blended into a frantic chorus of frustration. This tense scene did not escape the attention of the patrol officers. Upon noticing the clear danger, they wasted no time in sounding their siren, breaking the silence and chaos in the air. The sound of the siren rang out, a sharp warning, demanding the SUV driver to stop immediately and face the consequences of her reckless behavior. As the car slowly reduced speed and pulled over, the window of the SUV slowly lowered, revealing a woman sitting inside. Her hair was styled elaborately, each curl seemingly an artwork in itself, and she wore expensive clothes, with every detail exuding luxury and arrogance. Particularly, her wrist, adorned with sparkling gold bracelets, made her appear as a symbol of wealth and power. Her eyes glimmered with defiance, showing no fear whatsoever. Her very presence seemed to declare that she was not someone to be easily controlled. As the officer began to ask for her documents, she smirked, mocking him with her tone, dragging out each word as if asserting her superiority over everyone around her. "I'm the wife of a cop. Do you really think you can tell me what to do?" Her statement, full of pride and arrogance, was not just a claim about her identity but also a reflection of deep disrespect for the authority of the officer carrying out his duty. When she mentioned her relationship with a police officer, it was not merely an expression of pride in her husband but an exhibition of power that she believed she had. She seemed to think that this connection would exempt her from every rule and law of society. She had no hesitation in using her husband's position to carve out a world for herself where she could disregard the regulations that others were expected to follow. From this, we can see her overwhelming arrogance, believing that she was immune from the responsibilities and obligations that everyone else had simply because of her connection to someone in law enforcement. She not only wanted to show off her status but also sought to use this link to impose control over the situation, viewing herself as an exception in society where everyone else had to adhere to common rules. This not only displayed excessive confidence but also a lack of understanding of the concept of fairness in society, as she assumed she stood above the rules that ordinary people must follow. Her words were not merely a direct challenge to the officer but also an exhibition of personal power, granting herself privileges without realizing the wrongdoing in her behavior. She saw herself as special, an individual above all, yet failed to recognize that it was her attitude that was wrong, breaking the principles of equality and justice in society. This action reflected not only a disregard for the law but also for those working tirelessly to uphold order and fairness within the community. Right from the start, her attitude showed excessive self-confidence, as if she felt she was above the law. This behavior was not just simple defiance but bore the marks of someone who believed in their own invulnerability. She seemed to think that, thanks to her relationship with a police officer, she could bypass social rules, even using it as a shield to push responsibility out of her control. This attitude not only caused discomfort, but also heightened the tension in the situation. The officer faced with her not only had to carry out his duty, but also contend with a clear challenge to his authority and honor. She forced the officer to make a difficult choice. Should he submit to her contempt, or firmly uphold justice and continue with his duties, despite the opposition? This not only increased the tension, but also created a situation where the authority of the law was challenged and placed in a difficult position. When individuals believe they have special privileges or immunity because of their social position or relationships, they will not hesitate to undermine the social and legal principles that were put in place to protect fairness. One prominent aspect of this passage is that it highlights one of the most dangerous traits of those who feel exempt from rules. Their arrogance and disdain for others make them willing to escalate situations, even causing unnecessary conflict. They not only show disrespect for those who enforce justice, but also display a deep contempt for social order, regardless of the consequences. This action reflects not just an individual attitude, but also a larger societal issue: the erosion of trust in the justice system and the inequality that exists in society. People like her not only break traffic rules or simple regulations, but also challenge the entire legal system, weakening respect for and adherence to laws within the community. Her attitude does not only lead to a personal conflict, but serves as a warning of the risks when power and arrogance push society into chaos. In this tense situation, the police officer facing the woman gave no indication of confusion or loss of composure. Although he knew that she was not only expressing annoyance but also challenging him, he remained determined to maintain his calm, not allowing her words or actions to distract him from his duty. The officer's demeanor highlighted an essential quality of law enforcement: composure in every situation. While she continuously raised her voice, attempting to use words to lessen the severity of the situation, the officer remained focused, never allowing himself to be tempted into responding emotionally. This was not only a demonstration of professionalism in his job, but also a reflection of an important trait for anyone executing public duties: patience. The officer understood that his mission was to maintain order and justice, and no provocation could alter his decision. Even as the woman persistently tried to cause trouble, he stood firm, facing her with unwavering eyes, maintaining a composed demeanor, and fulfilling his responsibilities without hesitation. His actions were not just a reflection of a responsible public servant, but also a testament to a core principle of justice. Everyone is equal before the law, and no one, regardless of their special connections, can escape fair treatment from the authorities. Through the officer's composure, it became clear that justice is not a response to emotion, but the proper enforcement of regulations, regardless of resistance or challenge. In this passage, the contrast between the woman's self-satisfaction and the officer's calmness is not simply an opposition between two individuals, but a symbol of the opposing values in society. The woman, with her sense of entitlement through her relationship with her husband, a police officer, clearly shows disrespect for the law and an arrogance that disregards common rules. She believes she can overcome any situation simply because she is the wife of a cop, reflecting a self-important and subjective attitude, thinking that personal power can alter the outcome of normal situations in society. In contrast, the officer in this situation shows remarkable composure and patience, even when faced with someone clearly challenging and resisting him. Instead of being drawn into an argument or acting impulsively, he maintains his professionalism and calm, showing not only wisdom but also a testament to the responsibility and dignity of someone who executes justice. His refusal to let emotions influence him and his adherence to legal procedures, even in the face of strong opposition, serves as a lesson in patience and respect for rules, no matter how difficult the circumstances may be. This contrast highlights a profound lesson about power and responsibility. Power is not a tool for abuse or to rise above others, but a responsibility that requires fairness and respect for every individual, regardless of who they are. The officer in this story is the ideal model of someone who is responsible, always valuing justice and fairness, refusing to be swayed by any relationships or privileges. Furthermore, The officer's patience carries an important message about behavior in tense situations. He understands that only composure and self-control will help resolve issues effectively without complicating the situation further. This is not only a personal trait but also a fundamental requirement in justice. Fairness cannot be compromised by emotions or external pressures. From a societal perspective, the story also carries a message about equality before the law. Regardless of one's status, relationships, or privileges, everyone must abide by common rules to protect fairness and order in society. The officer, through his calmness and patience, shows that no one is exempt from their responsibilities, and every action has consequences. In conclusion, the contrast between the woman's self-satisfaction and the officer's composure not only creates clear dramatic tension but also highlights the crucial values of society: power paired with responsibility, patience in justice, and respect for the law for everyone, no matter who they are. That night, the air became stifling and damp, as though every breath was trapped in the narrow space, unable to escape. The smell of alcohol, especially the strong stench from the woman's breath, infiltrated the space, creating a suffocating sense of discomfort. The odor not only made the air more oppressive, but also caused the officer to feel burdened by an intangible sense of confusion. He was not only dealing with a drunken individual but also facing an unpredictable situation full of complex implications. Despite the woman's attempts to maintain composure, her gaze and gestures completely betrayed her words. Her movements, though trying to appear confident, were unnatural, trembling slightly as though her body was resisting what she was trying to maintain. Particularly, her absent-minded eyes, unfocused, revealed instability in her mind, unable to hide the fatigue and loss of control. Every motion exuded awkwardness, and though she tried to conceal it, those signals were unmistakable. She was no longer sober enough to handle the situation. Even her arrogance, as though trying to prove that she could control any situation, was just a thin veneer covering an undeniable truth. She was losing control, and that confidence was simply a reaction to unacknowledged anxiety. The officer, who had faced thousands of stressful and complex situations throughout his years of service, was not easily subdued by discomfort or the challenging attitude of lawbreakers. He had encountered all kinds of situations, from risky arrests to handling aggressive individuals. However, even an experienced officer like him couldn't help but feel a bit perplexed when confronted with this woman. Still, he remained steadfast in his calmness, as the patience of a professional police officer was something he held most dear in his work. He requested her identification, fully aware that this could be a challenging situation, one that might not go as expected. In the police officer's voice, there remained a sense of resolve and professionalism, even though a subtle anxiety could be detected, an awareness that the situation might unfold in ways that were unpredictable. His eyes never left the woman in front of him, trying to gauge every action, every reaction she made. Yet, her response was nothing like he expected. From the very first moments, he noticed the lack of cooperation in her gaze, a look that couldn't hide her disdain, as if all the requests and rules he was trying to apply had no value to her. Her attitude was not simply one of refusal to cooperate, but rather a clear act of defiance, as if she felt she was not bound by anything except what she deemed to be right. Her hands tightly gripped the steering wheel, and her posture revealed a tension that was far from light, but it wasn't out of fear or worry, it was self-satisfaction. Every question the officer asked was either ignored or met with curt, uncooperative answers. She even openly disrespected him with her challenging gaze, making it impossible for the officer not to feel a strange sense of unfamiliarity, as if he was dealing with someone who adhered to none of society's norms. She didn't just disregard the rules. It was as if she wanted to prove that her status as the wife of a police officer was enough to shield her from any consequences. Instead of providing the necessary documents like any ordinary citizen, she unexpectedly declared that she was exempt from all laws due to her relationship with her husband, a police officer. This statement not only shocked the officer, but immediately caused him to feel a deep wound to the values of justice and the rule of law that he stood for. Her tone, arrogant and defiant, was not just a claim of illegitimate power, but also a declaration of war against the fundamental principles that every citizen must follow. It seemed she didn't understand that, In a civilized society, every citizen is subject to the scrutiny of the law, regardless of their position or personal relationships. Her declaration didn't just display an astonishing level of self-satisfaction, but also reflected a privileged mindset, a belief that she was an exception, special, and beyond all limitations. She didn't just disregard societal regulations. She tried to make herself the only exception, a special individual who didn't need to adhere to the rules that everyone else had to follow. In reality, her actions reflected a profound misunderstanding of power, the belief that personal connections with someone in power could protect and exempt her from her civic responsibilities. This so-called exemption wasn't just an expression of disdain for those on duty, but a direct insult to police officers, who silently work day and night to uphold order and justice. They work under pressure and danger, yet they must also face disrespect and non-cooperation from people like her. While justice demands fairness and consistency, she saw herself as someone outside the law, placing personal interests above the common good. What started as a simple traffic violation gradually became a major test of the officer's patience and ability to maintain authority. He was not only facing opposition from her, but also had to control his emotions and determination, not allowing her challenge to weaken his faith in justice. This wasn't just a battle of wits between the two, but a test of the police officer's resolve in the face of unpredictable situations, pushing him to the limits of his patience and determination. The most striking aspect of this situation was not the reckless driving or even the woman's defiance, but the clear display of contempt and self-satisfaction she exhibited. Instead of cooperating with the police, she ignored all reasonable requests and began showing excessive confidence. Specifically, her revelation that she had 3 guns in the car wasn't just an act that escalated the tension, but a reckless declaration of fearlessness and a blatant disregard for danger. What was particularly noteworthy was the question she directed at the officer. "What are you going to do to me?" This wasn't simply a challenge, but a reflection of an arrogant, vague expectation of power that she believed she had due to her relationship with her husband, a police officer. This was a mixture of false security and authority, as she seemed to believe that just because her husband was a police officer, she wouldn't face legal consequences, or at least wouldn't be treated the same way as ordinary citizens. Her self-satisfaction was even more apparent as she continued to use her personal relationship to protect herself from responsibility. Despite being a lawbreaker, she refused to admit her mistakes and instead felt entitled to act as though the laws didn't apply to her. Both sides of this confrontation, the police officer and the woman, were engaged in a tense battle of wits, one side demanding respect for the law, while the other tried to exploit an imagined power from a family connection to resist fairness. This not only created an atmosphere of tension and conflict, but also raised questions about power, justice, and how relationships can alter the functioning of society. In that moment of high tension, the officer was not only dealing with a woman under the influence, but also drawn into a complex, dangerous situation that carried numerous unpredictable threats. The reason for pulling over in this case stemmed from reckless driving, something that, for a police officer, was a regular part of the job. However, what made the situation more complicated was the woman's response. Instead of cooperating and complying with the officer's request, she displayed an arrogant and defiant attitude. She not only refused to comply but continued to assert that she was exempt, claiming that her relationship with a police officer granted her special power, allowing her to transcend ordinary regulations. Her response, filled with arrogance and pride, made the situation much more tense. She wasn't just stubborn, she exhibited extreme arrogance, seemingly believing that the law and the power of the authorities were irrelevant when faced with her, simply because her husband was a police officer. This attitude not only heightened the seriousness of the situation, but also created an environment of uncertainty and uncontrollability, forcing the officer to face a situation that was not just a traffic violation but a test of power and justice. This woman's self-satisfaction was not only a disrespect to the officer, but also a latent threat to the power and fairness that he represented. From the very first moment, the situation was no longer just a simple traffic stop. It quickly escalated into a complex and chaotic series of events. The woman, instead of cooperating with the authorities, immediately displayed overt defiance. She repeatedly issued challenges, refused to provide the necessary documents, and adopted an uncooperative attitude from the outset. Her stubbornness not only made the situation tense but also forced the police officers to face an unpredictable scenario, where every decision and action they took could further escalate the situation. As time went on, the severity of the situation grew, and it not only affected the officers but also made the bystanders anxious and uneasy. The sense of danger no longer stemmed solely from the woman's actions, but from the lack of control and the ability of the authorities to maintain order. Her arrogance and defiance created an environment ripe for confrontation, making those around her feel on edge, as if a dangerous escalation could occur at any moment. Every word and movement from her seemed like a spark that could ignite a more dangerous conflict, making the atmosphere increasingly tense and difficult to manage. In this context, the feeling of losing control didn't only come from the handling of the situation but also from the inability to predict her next move, causing everyone involved to brace themselves for a potentially disastrous outcome at any time. This sustained tension not only wore down the police officers but also contributed to a sense of instability in the surrounding community, creating an atmosphere full of anxiety and crisis. When asked to step out of the vehicle, the woman immediately displayed a stubborn attitude and refused to cooperate. She not only ignored the officers' requests but also showed an air of arrogance and indifference. Sitting firmly in the driver's seat, she made no attempt to demonstrate any willingness to cooperate. Her eyes fixed straight ahead, as though she were completely unaware of the officer's presence around her. Her silence was not one of timidity or worry, but was a clear expression of arrogance, as though she believed herself to be above the law and beyond reproach. Although the police officers patiently asked her to open the door and step out, she responded with cold indifference, leaving the situation tense and awkward. Each time an officer requested that she exit the vehicle, she remained silent, offering no explanation or reason. This attitude not only displayed disdain for the officers but also implied her belief that, as the wife of a police officer, she should be exempt from the basic requirements of the law. She clearly felt that she was not bound by the same rules that ordinary citizens must adhere to, which only increased the frustration and anger of those enforcing the law. Her indifference and arrogance in this situation were not merely a personal response but a glaring manifestation of contempt for authority and social rules. For the officers, handling this was not easy, as they had to maintain calm and patience while carrying out their duties. However, their patience only highlighted the growing suspicion they began to feel toward her. Her obstinacy wasn't just about refusing to cooperate but was also evident in her sluggish reactions, which were completely inappropriate for an emergency situation. One of the strangest aspects was her lack of reaction. When the officers requested she present documents or cooperate in the next steps, she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she sat motionless, almost as if she were trying to challenge the officers' patience. Her refusal to act quickly made the officers' requests seem pointless in her eyes, or at least not impactful enough to sway her. Her slow actions not only conveyed contempt for following the rules but also raised troubling questions. Was she deliberately trying to slow down the process to create a disruptive situation, or was she truly intoxicated to the point of being incapable of reacting rationally? This only deepened the officers' confusion, as they couldn't determine whether she was intentionally resisting or simply unable to control her actions due to alcohol consumption. Her lack of cooperation was not just a challenge for the officers but also reflected an attitude of self-centered entitlement, as if she believed she had the right to do whatever she wanted without adhering to the rules that others must follow. This exposed one of the most irritating facets of arrogance, when someone believes that, for some reason, they can stand outside the law's reach. While the officers continued to patiently await her cooperation, her hesitation and defiance further muddied the situation, forcing them to confront an important question. How do you handle someone who is not only disrespectful but may also be too intoxicated to recognize their own actions? When the officers began interacting with the woman, one of the first signs that raised their suspicions was the strong smell of alcohol on her breath. This not only confirmed their suspicions of intoxication, but also raised a significant question about whether she was attempting to evade legal responsibility. Not only was she refusing to cooperate with the police's requests, but she was also displaying a firm resistance, even refusing to exit the vehicle despite being informed she was being arrested for driving under the influence, DUI. This lack of cooperation, combined with her disrespectful attitude toward the officers, created a tense atmosphere not only for the police but also for the bystanders witnessing the event. The situation not only caused significant traffic disruption in the area, but also attracted the attention of numerous passers-by. What began as a simple traffic stop turned into a dramatic confrontation between the law and personal power. A wealthy woman, who seemed to believe she could use her family connections to avoid any consequences, was now facing the full force of the law. This event left those who witnessed it stunned and amazed as they realized that no one, regardless of their social status or connections to law enforcement, could escape responsibility for breaking the law. The scene became a powerful symbol of justice, showing that everyone, no matter how rich or powerful, must face the consequences of their wrongdoings. Before the wife began her disruptive journey, a provocative act by the husband left everyone astonished, as it was not only thoughtless but also almost absurd in this context. While the police were carrying out their routine traffic checks, the husband suddenly stepped out of his car, showing no hesitation, and raised his middle finger directly at the officers. This was not merely an act of provocation, but also a blatant display of contempt for the authority of the law, as if he believed he was exempt from the rules that govern everyone else. What made this situation particularly illogical and dramatic was his ignorance and sense of entitlement to exemption. Instead of showing cooperation or at least respect for those enforcing the law, he chose to behave arrogantly and challengingly, as though this act would grant him something more than disdain. His actions not only heightened the tension in the air but also made the officers and witnesses wonder about the loss of control and contempt he was displaying, making the situation much more dramatic and absurd. The image of a man boldly confronting police officers right in the middle of the street was shocking to the witnesses and painted a satirical, almost absurd picture, making people question his motivations and attitude. Could this be a manifestation of excessive confidence, where he believes his position and familial relationships give him special power, allowing him to bypass rules and laws? Or was it simply the foolish, thoughtless action of a man deliberately causing trouble, not considering the consequences? The way he expressed his lack of self-control, through provocative gestures, offensive remarks, and an arrogant, stubborn attitude, made the entire situation chaotic and unnecessarily tense. He not only ignored the warnings and orders from the police, but also used his family connections as a shield, allowing himself to act as if everything could be forgiven simply because of a special relationship. This attitude not only reflected a lack of respect for the law, but also revealed an immature, irresponsible personality. His defiance not only caused chaos for those around him, but also triggered a chain reaction, making the situation more complicated, creating tension, and drawing the attention of the crowd to a completely unnecessary scene. His actions not only disrupted the situation, but also thrust this family into the center of mockery, becoming a living symbol of thoughtless and rude behavior in the eyes of the public. Those around them, who had believed they were witnessing a family with special social status, were now confronted with the opposite reality, where power and fame seemed insufficient to command respect. Instead, they were left as clear evidence of absurdity and foolishness. In this context, their story was not just a personal incident but a real-life comedy, where authority did not always equate to respect but sometimes backfired, highlighting the incompetence and immature behavior of those who appeared infallible. Amid the chaos, the surprise and shock spread through the crowd, as no one could have imagined that those supposedly at the top of society could fall into such a miserable situation. At the police station, the situation became even more tense as the woman continued to act beyond bounds, pushing everything toward chaos. After being brought into a holding room, she suddenly carried out a bold move. She removed her handcuffs. This unexpected and unbelievable act forced the officers to immediately stop their ongoing work and focus on this dangerous situation. The atmosphere, already tense due to earlier incidents, was now further disrupted and raised to a new level of tension. Not stopping at removing her handcuffs, the woman continued to display her lack of restraint by shouting, yelling, and continuously accusing the officers of wrongdoing, claiming that they had abused their power and violated her rights. These accusations were not only unfounded but were delivered in an aggressive and hostile manner, creating an extremely suffocating atmosphere. Her frustration seemed to have exceeded all limits, as she repeatedly threatened to destroy the careers of the officers, believing she had the right to do so simply because she was married to a policeman. These threats were not merely idle words, but were expressed with a determination and danger that made the officers and witnesses uneasy. In a state of extreme anger, she kept shouting, issuing serious threats, even declaring she would kill each of the officers present. These words were not only shocking but also escalated the atmosphere inside the police station to a point where it could erupt at any moment. The officers, trying to maintain order and control, found themselves facing a woman whose madness and lack of reason made everything even more unstable than before. The tension in the space reached its peak, forcing everyone to remain on high alert, waiting for an unexpected reaction. A sense of anxiety and unease began to spread throughout the police station, enveloping every corner as her aggressive actions escalated. The officers, despite having dealt with numerous tense and complicated situations throughout their careers, could not help but feel the pressure as they were forced to deal with a woman who was both arrogant and uncooperative. They had to use all necessary measures to subdue her once again, but her refusal to relent made their efforts extremely difficult. Her arrogant attitude, combined with her intoxicated state, created an atmosphere of chaos and anger, not just for the officers but also for those present at the police station. The police officers were not only dealing with an uncontrollable subject, but also facing the danger that the situation could harm them and those around them in this hazardous moment. This event, with all its dramatic and tense developments, not only highlighted her lack of self-control and carelessness, but also emphasized the serious consequences that could arise when an individual abuses their power and influence to confront the law in an unjust way. It also reflected deeper societal issues, where individuals with power fail to recognize the limits needed in their behavior, leading to tense confrontations and even potentially violent clashes with law enforcement. She was charged with driving under the influence, DUI, assaulting law enforcement officers, and possessing an illegal firearm, serious offenses that could lead to severe penalties. Facing the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence and substantial fines, each charge had the potential to ruin a person's life. However, what stood out was her attitude throughout the arrest process. Despite confronting these powerful charges, she showed no signs of remorse or regret. On the contrary, she continued to complain, whine, and cry irrationally, as though she had no awareness of the severity of the actions she had just committed. Rather than showing any remorse or understanding of her mistakes, her attitude clearly expressed dissatisfaction and a sense of being treated unfairly. It seemed as if she felt she did not deserve to be arrested, despite her actions being a clear violation of the law. She repeatedly blamed the surrounding circumstances, the officers carrying out their duties, and even blamed unfortunate situations that she claimed forced her to act the way she did. Every word and gesture from her conveyed strong resistance, as though she believed that because she was the wife of a police officer, everything could be forgiven. This lack of self-awareness and her arrogant attitude made the situation uncomfortable and even somewhat laughable, as she assumed an exemption from the law, despite the truth being right in front of her. One of the most distasteful and thoughtless actions she exhibited was repeatedly emphasizing her relationship with a police officer. It was as if she could not understand that, in a legal situation, another person's status could not be used as a justification for her own wrongdoings. She assumed that simply because she was married to a police officer, all of her actions should be forgiven, and that her husband's reputation would shield her from any punishment. Every time she mentioned her husband, her tone was filled with pride, as if that were a green card that allowed her to bypass all regulations and rules. However, this pride inadvertently revealed a serious ignorance of the rights and responsibilities of a citizen in society. Her arrogant attitude and disrespect towards law enforcement not only made her the antagonist in the eyes of those witnessing the scene, but also stirred deep anger. She failed to realize that her actions not only violated the law, but also shattered the fairness and respect that every individual, regardless of their position or relationships, must adhere to. Each of her statements, each scream about the power she believed she possessed, only made others feel more uncomfortable and disgusted. She did not realize that, instead of standing out as a person with authority, she had made herself a prime example of ignorance, arrogance, and a misguided approach to those who were performing their duties. Her arrogance not only delayed the process but also heightened the tension between her and the police officers, who were trying to maintain order. Her actions became even more irrational and unrealistic when she failed to realize that, no matter who her husband was, she was still responsible for her own actions. The crowd witnessing the event could not help but shake their heads in disbelief, sighing at her thoughtless and self-important behavior. They could not help but feel pity for someone who could not control themselves in such a tense situation. She did not merely ignore the charges against her, but also used the so-called protection she believed she was entitled to as an excuse for her actions, asserting that because her husband was a police officer, she had the right to be exempt from legal regulations. This was a clear demonstration of her ignorance about the basic principles of the legal system, where no one, regardless of their status or relationships, is above the law. In fact, she even disrespected the authority granted to law enforcement officers, treating them as people who were unworthy of her compliance or respect. This behavior highlighted not only her lack of understanding about equality and justice in society, but also her blatant disregard for those who were serving to protect the community. Despite being warned multiple times by the police and asked to cooperate, she continued not only to refuse but to argue, challenging their authority. This uncooperative attitude became even more serious when she started acting aggressively, even confronting officers directly, complicating not only the law enforcement process but also creating a tense and chaotic atmosphere. All of these actions not only complicated the situation but also made the witnesses feel that her arrogance and disregard for the law were a vivid example of the decay of basic moral values in society. When an individual, regardless of who they are, can openly challenge the legal system and feel no responsibility to follow the common regulations, it reflects a decline in the understanding of citizenship rights and duties. The lack of respect for justice not only weakens the community's faith in the legal system but also creates a dangerous precedent, encouraging defiant actions and challenging the core values that society has built over centuries. At the end of the incident, her behavior was not only a lesson in arrogance and disrespect for the law, but also reflected a troubling reality in modern society: a lack of understanding of civic responsibility and a disregard for the fundamental principles of justice. People like her, no matter their special relationships, cannot stand outside the law. Her actions not only had a negative impact on herself but also eroded the community's trust in the legal system. The lesson here is that respect for the law, under any circumstances, must always be prioritized. No one can exploit power or personal relationships to escape their responsibility before the law. It is the recognition of justice and fairness that will create a civilized society where every individual must abide by the common regulations, regardless of who they are or their relationships.